2. Hey everybody, welcome. We are live here in Santa Clara, California for DevOps World 2023. And we have our first interview session. I'll introduce our guest in a moment, but we want to welcome you to our live broadcast, live stream of the conference. We have a whole lineup of people to come talk with us, thought leaders in different areas of technology and regulatory compliance and future AI. We kind of have all the good jelly beans in the jar that we're going to go explore and share together. So speaking of which, I have Gayatri Prakash, who is VP and GM of Compliance at CloudBees. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good. I have to have my second coffee to get all that out in one breath, so I appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
So, you know, compliance is one of those topics we used to talk about, like, oh, at the end, we need to get that information to the compliance and auditing people. But of course, we've rethought that completely, right? How do we make this a continuous part of security and compliance as we're from the very beginning, but throughout the development, CI/CD pipeline, the entire software development process. And you're giving a talk later too. I love doing the interviews. Wish I could hear your talk too, but share us kind of where things are at and what you're thinking about these days.
Sure, yeah. So Mitch, I'll start with one of the stats I read yesterday while I was flying down. And
my bad, keep going.
70% of the DevOps initiatives in 2022 failed to hit the KPIs. And the common factor there is security, because security still is very much, it comes in at stages into that DevOps ecosystem. So as you said, we need to figure out a way of making security continuous and part of the fabric of DevOps. So the interpretation of DevSecOps that we've ended up with is a lot of tooling at the left, which is push early detection, push everything to a developer as quickly as possible. But the developer is not a security expert. And developer has joined that job to create features, cool features, service, custom things that light up the customer, right? They are there to create code. And they are not always, I shouldn't say this as a generic statement, they're not always the best judge of which CVEs need fixing, which security vulnerabilities could get you hacked, versus the ones that can live for the next month's development lifecycle, right? So the trick here is to try and shift security in a smart way, shift smart, put security steps right from the start. Absolutely, secure by default is my favorite phrase, not as much as we've heard secure by design. Of course that's needed, but it should also be secure by default. And how do we do that? It's by shifting security into, like I said, smart. Put each stage of security verification at a place where it is most effective, accurate, and scalable. So whether that's SAS scan or DAS scan or SCA scan, there is a place for every scan to happen. The ability to orchestrate that intelligently from outside of the pipeline, so it's not the DevOps engineers' burden to build security into the pipelines they're building. They build the pipelines that deliver code from developers' worktop, desktop, through to production. We take care of the security, agnostic to that, outside of that. That's one part of it, because triggering scanning, whether that's any one of the scanners that we just talked about, typically if you take a service, it is made up of a number of assets. I call them assets, but you've got your infrastructure, you've got code, you've got binary, you've got pipelines. All of this stuff needs governance. But at the end of the day, if you get separate reports from each of these and push it down to the developers, you're severely hampering their ability to do something with it. At the end of the day, the scan is a means to an end. Its detection is a very first step. It's the remediation and the long-term security posture. That is the strategic goal. So for that to happen, you need to know what you've got all the time. This is an application. I can't protect what I don't know. So first of all, have a real-time view of what you've got within that application. We build in the ability within our security and compliance tool to provide that insight to the customers. Given a service, given an application, what assets does it use at any given point in time. Second thing is, how are those assets changing? As the developer's committing code, CI pipeline is running, artifact is getting pushed into Artifactory, how are those assets changing? Based on change, detect what needs to be done for that. I.e., if a source code has just been merged into a release branch, figure out what security scanners that are there in your ecosystem that can act on that source code. Get that security posture updated. If a binary artifact gets pushed into Artifactory, trigger the security scans that is relevant to that action. And at the end of that, bring all of that together into a single dashboard that is powered from this common source of truth, not a separate report from this, a separate report from this, and a separate report from this. Bring that single view, that's kind of cube, if you like, there's developer on one side, security on the other side, your shared services on the other side. They are all looking at the metrics that are relevant to them to make this whole machinery work. But it's coming from that single real-time source of data, right? This is just the internal stuff. If we get this right, the auditors can come and knock on our door anytime. Mm-hmm. We've just got the evidence ready, out of the box.
You know, what's great, Gayatri, is you're talking about sort of this, kind of what I saw 4, 5, 6 years ago, is we're creating all this data and information. We have this flow and this process. And how do we leverage that data, whether it's, you know, security scans or new code being checked in or new dependencies on a third-party code, whatever things might be introducing potential security issues.
Yeah.
And how do you make that part of the workflow? How do you make that part of the flow of the process? Not something that, you know, if you were driving down the street and your car suddenly popped up the latest safety report for your vehicle and all the recalls you might need to do. I don't need that right now. I just need kind of I need to know somebody's in the lane next to me, right? I need to know what I need to work on at this moment while I'm in this piece of code or while I'm doing this kind of work. So it seems like, you know, CloudBees has made a lot of advances of thinking about this as not just a security discipline, but an engineering discipline across the entire kind of workflow pipeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the point you've made is very valid, which is there are a lot of problems. There is a stat that, again, I'm a very big fan of these, but there was a stat that was released that out of all the CVEs that we know, only 5% need fixing. Mm-hmm. The problem is none of us know which 5%. So anything we can do to invest in making that decision more accurate, I bring all of the data, prioritize, agnostic to everything, specific toolings that are out there. How do we make sure that the information that we are providing as a platform provider is actually going to result in a positive trend in the security? Because if you look at compliance, what is compliance? CloudBees compliance it's called compliance and security solution. What is compliance? Compliance is demonstration to your customers that you have got security covered, right? But it's table stakes. It's a point in time accreditation. Security is much wider than that. It is about making sure that you are secure all the time, because the hackers are not waiting for the audits to happen. Right?
They don't read the audit reports,
yeah,
right?
They don't read the audit reports, exactly. So there's the prioritization that you mentioned, which is, what is my today's problem that I need to know? That is super important. So a scanner will tell you something is critical, something is high, but is it though? How do we, and something that is medium, flagged as medium, could be a higher risk to your service because it is affecting a service that is very, very exposed. And, that's the decision that we've got to help the teams make. And we are, as you rightly said, we are providing a single platform as CloudBees. We are providing everything that is needed for an organization to take developers' code safely across all the environments and ultimately to the customer, right? And security and compliance is just weaved right into that process. Mm-hmm. Everything that we do is about making sure that the customers don't have to do one thing for developing code, one thing for deploying code, one thing for orchestrating code, and something else for security then, and something else for compliance, because that is not cost effective. And that is not effective as a process because it introduces friction at multiple stages, right?
We're so used to discrete steps, vertical disciplines, right? And it all supposed to fit into its nice matrix of how it works, but there's a lot of friction in that process. Many things you mentioned that were important, and one of the things I really relate to is the cognitive load, the distance of addressing work that's not in the flow of what you're working on, whether you're the developer, the security engineer, whoever it might be. What are some of the things that help people decide what's relevant to provide to a developer at this point in time versus things that might be relevant to a platform engineer or a DevOps engineer or somebody building the environment? How do you kind of get the right information to the right people at the right time?
So what we do, that's a very good question, because there is a right skill set required, and they have to be introduced at the right stages of the problem. That's a very poignant question. So what we do is we provide what we call the security center for our customers, which is again, going back to that single pane view of, for this service, for this application, what are all the problems I have? And think of it as a triage center with a little bit of help from AI, to say, these are all the problems I have, but developers don't yet need to get involved with all of these problems. So if you have a security champion in your team or an AppSec person in charge of that application, there is a triage process that you could follow, because we understand the context, because context is so important in security. So we understand the context, we understand the composition of your application, put the context and the composition along with the severity and things like the EPSS score, which is the historical exploitability of a problem. When you put all of those data points together, the security center is allowing or empowering the security champions to say, does this need fixing? Does this need developer input? It's only when they mark something as business as usual that would then go into a developer's workflow, end up in a Jira board somewhere for them to do something about it. But there are other examples of where developers might benefit from knowing things quickly. So for example, if you know that Log4j package XYZ is vulnerable, and you've already got that detection intelligence, you've already got, we provide dashboards for our customers to say, insights if you like, where they can go and put a third-party package that has just been declared as vulnerable, put a version number, and within seconds you get a list of all of the services that are impacted, all of the repos that are impacted, and who needs to do what to address that. Because that's the biggest problem. Detection is the biggest problem when it comes to third-party vulnerabilities. So bringing this back to some problems, when I made the point that some problems can be pushed to developers and should be pushed to developers. So this is a good use case. When you know you've got a list of vulnerable packages, that stuff developers should know straight at the point where they're trying to push a PR into the system with a vulnerable package that they've just introduced.
That'd be the point in time to take care of it if you can, right?
And that makes sense for them. So there is a balance between what should be pushed to developers early and what should be triaged before it's pushed to developers. And we support both of these workflows, provide the tooling necessary to follow a triage process, track a remediation automatically. And let's face it, not all problems can be fixed. That is the reality of where we live today, right? And you need to have mitigating policies, mitigating controls. And this is where we allow our customers to build their own policies, provide out-of-the-box policies that can be activated. And they can use those policies to risk accept something, right? Because it doesn't matter how big your security team is, you are going to risk accept some things, right? But it's about what mitigating controls do you have to accept that risk. Right?
Well, this is such a changing landscape, right? It isn't just the cyber attacks, but it's also regulatory compliance and how do we address all those things. I know people are always looking for information, tools. How can I present this to my board or to, a security team to help kind of get some of these things adopted? What kind of resources does CloudBees help? Where could they go to get some information like that?
Sure. So you can go on to CloudBees Compliance, CloudBees website, and put /compliance. There's a number of use cases, capability reports, and you can also get some white papers there. There's also a button you can hit to reach out to an expert, watch a demo, and we could do custom demos. Just hit that page, cloudbees.com/compliance, and you'll get the resources you need.
It's always nice when you can say it's on the website. Go grab it. Well, Gayatri, good luck with your talk this afternoon. Thanks for talking with us this morning. Your talk is at what time if folks are here?
It was supposed to be 3:45, but it's at 4 o'clock now.
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. Definitely check it out. But you've gotten a preview here, or you've gotten kind of the inside track here. So, Gayatri, thank you so much. Gayatri Prakash, VP and GM of Compliance with CloudBees. Stay tuned. We've got a number of interviews lined up, conversations. Don't go away. Same station, same channel, right here at DevOps World.
Thank you.
Hey there, welcome everybody. Welcome back to DevOps World in Santa Clara, Silicon Valley 2023. Another great interview lined up. It's always a pleasure to talk with Sasha Labouré. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mitch. How are you doing?
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
Sasha is Chief Strategy Officer, co-founder, and played some other roles at times in CloudBees.
Indeed. Everything was legal. Everything I've done was always legal.
Yeah, I didn't find anything to kind of throw at you about that. No, just kidding. There was a press release that's dropped today about some research, some information that a report that you all created. Tell us a little bit about that and maybe the things that were interesting to it.
Yeah, I think it's all of the discussion around platform engineering is getting a lot of visibility these days, and I think it's a natural progression of what we're seeing with DevOps, with cloud, and all of the progress that's happening so fast. And so we decided to do a survey around 221, so it's not around, it's 221 respondents replied to it. So it's not 100,000, but it's sufficient to start getting trends around what's happening, and we're seeing that it's real, right? I think it's only 17% of companies not caring or not having plans for this. So it means 83% do. So it's real, and it's impacting the way companies operate, definitively.
Why do you think that is? Because I have the same observation. It was sort of an interesting thing that's kind of happening, and all of a sudden, sort of like SRE, it became very fast.
I see it almost as a period of cleanse for DevOps, right? We came up with CI/CD, and it gave us it was amazing, right? It gave us lots of velocity. We could go fast. The notion of a pipeline and continuously delivering to production, all great. And it was so great that we started adding more and more to it because it's tempting. When it works, why not? And at the same time, cloud went through, I think, a similar type of growth, which is you start small, you start easy with, initially it was EC2 and S3, that's it. Mm-hmm. You add services, and you end up with lots of complexity. And so if you're a developer, you probably feel like your pipeline, your process got slightly, quote unquote, hijacked, right? Mm. Now you have CyberSec team who have a very important mission. They added 3 scanners and maybe 2 other for binaries, right, to your pipeline because, hey, it's convenient, and if you can fix it early, why not? Yes, why not? So every decision taken on its own makes sense. But when you accumulate them all and you look at the complexity, you realize that people are completely underwater and they can barely spend enough time coding, which is what they were supposed to do. And I don't want to sound like I'm defending developers more than any other practice, right? CyberSec teams, the number of CVEs you see, like I looked 10 years ago, it was a sixth of the CVEs we're going to get this year, right? So 6 times more CVEs per year in a decade. So every function is trying to find options, to find solutions on how to help this, and I think platform engineering is a very sane way to do it.
Yeah. In addition to what you're saying, it seems like the timing is right because, to your point about developers, initially when I heard about platform engineering, it's the response to the forgotten developer, right? We haven't been paying attention to them. We've been adding too many ornaments to the tree, and it's gotten too complex. But it's a lot more than that. With the kind of economic turmoil, things like that, people were looking at developer productivity. Well, how? How do we do that, right? And I think some of the platform engineering has been able to adapt to, here's some things we can do, internal development environment, standardized configurations, ready-made for development test on into production. You can kind of customize it to what you need to make things more efficient. So it seems like this is the perfect time. Maybe that's why it's come on.
You're probably right. Yeah, I think you're making a great point, which is when you see all of the layoffs that took place in the industry, you were 10 on a team, you're 5 on that team, how are you going to do it, right? So you need to get smarter at what you do. So I think you make a great point. Interestingly enough, I was trying to make some analogies with the past, right? And I feel we went through those type of things in the past as well. before my life at CloudBees, I was at JBoss, and JBoss was an open source application server. So I joined Red Hat at some point, and it was, if you think about an application server, right? It was the internet times, and the questions then quickly became, how can we make developers efficient by making sure they know how to clusterize their environment, to horizontally scale? How do they make it possible to do transactions, two-phase transactions? How do we make sure they can get security rights and authentication? And all of those matters, right? And that's what essentially built the J2E ecosystem for a decade, pretty much. You had all of those little specifications. And in some way, you can argue that the platform engineering with those catalogs of Lego blocks, if you will, that you can reuse, are a bit like the J2EE services from back in the days, apply to your own organization, obviously, right? But you want some to handle storage or access to backend systems or front-end development, or what's the baseline for a mobile application. And all of those core services are ready to be used. And so I think where anytime there is complexity, anytime we get to the point where you can't just own it all, but you have to collaborate. And I want to make it clear, it's still about collaboration. Sometimes it feels like, oh, so we don't do DevOps anymore? No, it's still collaboration, but you need to define how fine-grained you want this to be. Does collaboration means that everybody does everything? Or does that mean you collaborate and help each other in a way that scales? And I think that's really what it enables here.
Yeah, it's how those complementary, the greater whole benefits, right?
Yeah.
More than 1 + 1. Anything else, any other highlights from the study, from the report that you found interesting?
Yeah, I think people should definitively read it first. It's short and sweet, but I don't think anybody is going to be surprised. I think, to me, it was a lot of confirmation on what we kind of know, which is developers want to be more efficient. It's not just their boss who wants them to be more efficient. They want to be more efficient because it's a lot more fun. They want environments that can be self-service. They care about the experience being better. They also care about security, but not if it comes at the cost of not doing development, right? It needs to be balanced and so on. So you see all of those traits, and I think a lot of organizations will find themselves will see themselves in the mirror when they read this survey.
I was thinking that exact point is, sometimes there aren't like shocking information in a report, but it's validation. Also, when I read those kind of reports, I'm not doing everything that talks about. It's kind of taking information from a lot of different companies and environments, and maybe I'm not worried about developer portals right now, but that should be something we look into, because we've been focusing on, other areas. So it helps kind of break down where you might go next, or validate you're doing the things that you're doing around platform engineering.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think you're making a great point, which is it's a journey, and you're going to increase your maturity as you go through it, and you will discover new needs as you do so. I'm always a bit skeptical when people come at it with, oh, I want the full kit. I've heard I need X, Y, and Z to be a good citizen, so give it all to me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but then you don't really know what to do about it, right? So slow down, hurry up slowly, as we say, right? And focus on what needs to be solved first, second, and at some point you'll certainly need a portal, a catalog, and so on, but at the right point in time. And sometimes it can be stressful for organizations when they need to absorb too many concepts at once to behave, because they want to behave too well in some way. So hurry up slowly and absorb as your the clock of your system, your own DNA can absorb it.
That's some really good news. So I hijacked the schedule. You and I have the rest of the day to talk about AI. Nobody else is going to be here, just you and me, so we can, 6 hours of AI conversation.
Let's do it.
I can't say that. I wish we could do that. Just if you would share in some initial few thoughts, what are you thinking about in the AI domain, about either how it affects how we develop software, or the kind of apps that we're doing, or there's so many impacts that we can go down. I'm just curious what's top of mind for you. What problems are you thinking about?
Yeah, to me, it's a huge acceleration for development. I'm not yet seeing right now. Maybe it's going to be different in 10 years, right? It goes very fast, but I'm not worried as some are about the replacement of developers by AI. We've heard about this with no-code environment forever. However, can I see a huge speed up and an improvement on what developers can do and should do? Absolutely. We've seen it with Copilot. I think a huge part of what we're not seeing yet, but it's completely open to this, is how do you help with security? How do you not just detect that something is wrong, but automate the fixing of this? And I know some of that makes a lot of people uneasy to have statistical model essentially guess what should be the right answer. But what we're seeing is that it's actually not worse in most situations than what a human being would do, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of things done, which in 3 years, 5 years, we'll think we were crazy to do manually. It will be the punch cards of the future, right? When granddad explains to you how he was using a punch card, well, people will tell you how they had to review hundreds of CVEs every day, see if they apply, how to fix them, and so on. It just feels like absurd. So I think it's going to be a very positive journey for developers. Sometimes I'm a bit worried by something else, which is I see that the great developers, I'm not going to define what it means, but we all have in our environments people where we know like they're a lot more productive. They're really good. Sometimes I've observed that they're not necessarily the first one willing to embrace AI because they have such power in some way, such knowledge, and they know they are overall a lot more productive than the average Joe, that they don't really need that. But then we start seeing situations where more average developers can actually get to a point where they can be as productive or more productive. And so it's going to be interesting to see how people evolve and embrace this. Change is hard, but in that case, it might lead to some interesting social situations.
We seem to always make it through those, They was going to eliminate jobs. I don't think anybody's crying about card loaders and picking up punch cards that have dropped on the floor. And, we figured out that, it's okay that job has changed
it
to
seems
something
like
else. So,
yeah.
Well, we'll definitely pursue this topic some more, and I hope we have some time to do that on another day, another place, another Techstrong TV channel, if you will. Well, Sasha, it's been great chatting with you. Have a great rest of the day here at DevOps World. And what's the, but we can say it's my panel that's coming up, but what's the one coming up event talk that you really want to attend today?
I think I'm very excited always. I might actually be looking at the room when we have the keynote and we present some of the new products for this year. We've already talked about the new SaaS platforms that we're releasing, about some of amazing features for Jenkins in high availability, horizontal scalability, and so on. And it's really been a very positive news, extremely well received by people. So, I like to see people's face when they see that because it really has a positive impact. So.
Great, excellent. And download the report.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Download the report, available on cloudbiz.com, and enjoy the day.
Great. Sasha, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Be sure and hang around. We're just wrapping up this conversation, but we have more coming, so don't go away.
is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. You know, for those of you who watch Techstrong TV, you may know that we once a month do a nice video series where we take a deep dive. And the name of the show that we do that is called CD Pipelines. And it's a co-production of us here at Techstrong along with our friends at the CD Foundation, part of the Linux Foundation. Now, this is not a CD pipeline, but it's a special CD Foundation sort of interview, and I'm happy to be joined by actually two board members from CD Foundation. One you may recognize from our CD Pipeline show. It's Fadi Diramenci, and if I mispronounce it, Fadi, it's hard for me. I try. But welcome, Fadi. It's good to have you on. And the second gentleman, he's no stranger to TechStrong and DevOps.com. I've been working with him for 10 years. It's my good friend, Sasha Labouré. Sasha is I said a board member at CDF, but he's also co-founder and chief strategy officer at our good friends at CloudBees. Sasha, Fadi, a pleasure to have you both on. Welcome to TechStrong TV.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. You know, for those of you who watch Techstrong TV, you may know that we once a month do a nice video series where we take a deep dive. And the name of the show that we do that is called CD Pipelines. And it's a co-production of us here at Techstrong along with our friends at the CD Foundation, part of the Linux Foundation. Now, this is not a CD pipeline, but it's a special CD Foundation sort of interview, and I'm happy to be joined by actually two board members from CD Foundation. One you may recognize from our CD Pipeline show. It's Fadi Diramenci, and if I mispronounce it, Fadi, it's hard for me. I try. But welcome, Fadi. It's good to have you on. And the second gentleman, he's no stranger to Techstrong and DevOps.com. I've been working with him for 10 years. It's my good friend, Sasha Labouré. Sasha is I said a board member at CDF, but he's also co-founder and chief strategy officer at our good friends at CloudBees. Sasha, Fadi, a pleasure to have you both on. Welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you for having us, Alan.
It's a pleasure. But today we're going to talk Jenkins a little bit, right? For those who maybe, I think everyone in our audience knows Jenkins, but I don't know if everyone is aware that actually Jenkins was deeded over or given over to the management of the CD Foundation. Had to be about 4 or 5 years ago, Sasha, wasn't it? When the CD Foundation took over Jenkins?
Yeah, approximately 4 years ago, when the CDF was created, essentially.
Yeah, I think it was 2019.
Yep.
And so it's one of, Fadi, what is it? One of 8 or 9 projects within.
One of 9 projects. Jenkins is one of our founding projects and one of 9 at the moment. Yeah.
Yep. And again, our audience is familiar, but Jenkins is the backbone for many CI/CD installations at many, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of organizations. When I first started DevOps.com in 2013, DevOps was Jenkins. As someone once said, DevOps is the symptom, CD is the cure, and Jenkins is the medicine, right? And you know, Jenkins probably had 90% plus of the market. There were thousands of plugins. There's still thousands of plugins for it. But of course, over the 10 years, we've seen other projects, we've seen other solutions come to market, and people, you know, we live in an industry, unfortunately, of shiny new toys. Everybody likes to see the shiny new trinket, and they're attracted, and they almost take for granted what works for them every day. And we lose sight of just how embedded, if that's a good word to use, Jenkins is. But recently, CD Foundation did a little bit of a research, a little analysis, a little study, and they came up with some great facts we're going to share today on the state of Jenkins. Fair?
Amazing. Let's do it.
So, I shot my load. That's it. I've given you all the setup. I'm looking for you two to take it from here. Sasha, Fadi, tell us about the state of Jenkins.
Maybe just to add some of my personal views around Jenkins before we perhaps talk about the latest. So I'm an engineer. Like, even though I took this role at the Linux Foundation, leading the Continuous Delivery Foundation, I spent years, building pipelines, running CI/CD systems, working with, large organizations as well as open source communities. And as you highlighted, Alan, Jenkins is there. Jenkins is kind of part of what everyone is doing. Like, some organizations may be looking at other technologies, but I'm sure many of those organizations have lots of Jenkins installed either by central IT or by teams themselves. And I consider Jenkins as critical piece of production systems, which I call it's more than pipelines, actually. Production systems that actually let organizations to get those products from idea to code to, testing to release and finally to, production environments. And Jenkins is, I think it's fair to say, it's kind of backbone for these production systems. Obviously, innovation is happening within open source. It's impossible for innovation to slow down. But again, Jenkins is part of critical infrastructure, if you put it that way. It's not just part of critical CI/CD infrastructure, but part of critical infrastructure because people are using Jenkins in different ways. Like some people might be just considering using Jenkins for continuous integration purposes, but others might be doing some things we may never think of. So that's why it's like important to understand how critical Jenkins is for the world's production capability, if you put that way. And the numbers you mentioned, I think Sasha might help us with that part. That also highlights that Jenkins is there and it will continue to be an important piece in this complicated, way of developing software lately with all the new paradigms and, increasing complexity and so on.
Absolutely. Sasha, you have views on that? Don't wait for me to call on you. Go ahead.
No, I love how Fatih talks about critical infrastructure because that's really what it is, right? It's 18 years old now. Imagine 18, how many projects after 18 years old have hundreds of contributors every day contributing value. And it's not, hobbyists, quote unquote, are very important. I started as a hobbyist and that's amazing. But we're talking about big companies like AWS, like Atlassian, like, so many organizations contributing value to the project. So in 18 years, Jenkins has been able to weave itself into so many places, into so many pieces of infrastructure. It is indeed critical infrastructure and needs to be treated as such. And when you see the growth that it's still going through, it's not static, right? It's not just something that's left here and sleepy. It's something that's very active, very lively, lots of new things coming up, but also a lot of work being spent on making sure that Jenkins remains strong, remains scalable, because it's critical infrastructure, right? It's easier to have cool and fun stuff left and right with new projects because the responsibilities are relatively low. Once you start having big families and grandchildren and whatever can happen in 18 years, that the burden is not the same. And I think the community is embracing that responsibility extremely well.
Absolutely. So, gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'd like to dive in a little bit into some of the findings of the state of Jenkins. I don't know which one of you would like to take the lead, but feel free, either of you. But, I always like to say, can you give me 3 key data points that give people a good flavor, right? And the other thing is, I'll tell you, so you're both in Europe, but here in the U.S., every year the president does what they call the State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress and the whole government. And invariably the president stands up and says, I'm here to give you the State of the Union. The State of the Union is strong, right? They never say the State of the Union's bad or the State of the Union's weak, or it's always the State of the Union is strong. So I'm going to assume that the state of Jenkins is strong. Why is it strong? Show me where, how do we know it's strong? Sasha, go ahead.
Well, I'd love, Fatih, you wanna start?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is it's great to talk about, how things are going, how great things are going and so on. But it's also important to support these claims with actual numbers, actual data from the field. If we think about the production environments as our fields, as CD Foundation, the increase in use and adoption of Jenkins continues to be strong. For example, the increase in number of usage of Jenkins pipeline jobs over the last 2 years is around 79%. So that actually shows that people are actually creating new pipelines over and over, and it's adding new functionalities, introducing new stages within their pipelines and so on. And this growth, 79% between 2021 and 2023, shows how important Jenkins is and how much it is used by the organizations, both existing and new organizations, perhaps. Well, that is first number we can share perhaps, and I can continue with others, and maybe Sasha, you can add your perspective as well. The second number we have is about the workloads, like all job types. Like Jenkins pipelines is one way you can create your pipelines, but in Jenkins you can do things many different way. And if we consider all those different ways and think them as workloads regardless of their type, that also shows 45% increase. So it's kind of another important data point that shows, okay, some organizations might prefer to use pipelines, but others might be doing something else. Regardless of what they are doing, that shows strong growth for Jenkins when it comes to how organizations are using. And finally, and this is not an easy number to, come up, because some organizations may not be providing usage statistics to Jenkins community, but some reports, some analyst firms estimate Jenkins market share around 40%, which is, again, a really big number, because if you consider number of developers around the world, 25 to 30 million, 40% of 25 to 30 million is like more than 10 million developers using Jenkins. So it's really important to think that Jenkins is maybe half of the developers, they do something with Jenkins, maybe creating plugins or just configuring existing jobs or just getting feedback from the jobs created by their colleagues. So one way or other, Jenkins touches lives of different types of, developers. So these numbers are pretty important to know that it still continues to go strong.
Just to put some numbers out there on it, I happen to have access, is the Jenkins pipelines jobs as of June of 2023, so just a month or 2 months ago, over 48 million jobs per month. Over 48.5 million. Total monthly jobs workload, 73.74 per month. 73.74 per month. I mean, those are, to put it in context, right? Claudia, you said what it was, a 25 million developers, something like that. It's almost three per developer, right? For every developer in the world per month. That's crazy. Sasha, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, those are, furthermore, for me, they're just baseline numbers, right? I don't want to get too technical, but it's important to understand that a lot of the numbers, it's not everything that's happening in Jenkins land. If you have to accept that your jobs are being, your statistics are being sent, right? I suspect many banks are not shipping their statistics on a daily basis. You need to also make sure that you run Jenkins in a quote unquote relatively static fashion. Increasingly, people are starting Jenkins, shutting it down, and using very dynamic way to operate. If that's how it works, chances are very high those are not going to be counted. So I think it's really, for the way to see those numbers is really to think about it as a baseline, as a minimal amount. But it's like the tip of the iceberg. There is everything you don't see. And that I think represents well Jenkins as well, right? We sometimes don't talk about Jenkins, even though it's in front of us. It's everywhere. And as you said, 73 and change, 74 million of jobs is mind-boggling in terms of number. It's amazing. One number that I hinted at that before, but we're counting more than 600 developers contributing to the project in various capacity. Can be on plugins, can be on core, and that is super exciting, right? Because using open source, I get that, right? But if nobody's contributing to open source, we all face the same problem, right? You still need to get new contributions. A project is alive, right? You have new security issues, you have improvement you need to bring, you have new API, new cloud API you need to support. And to imagine that you have more than 600 people willing to contribute time, either as professional or as a hobbyist, is amazing. It's a testament to the health of the project 18 years after its birth.
Absolutely. If you look at the CD Foundation, sister foundation, of course, is CNCF, right? Cloud Native Computing. And, all of the Linux foundations, I think, use this kind of sandbox incubation graduation sort of model. And those models are based, Sasha, right on those kind of things. How many people are contributing? How many downloads? How, the maintainers and all of these things. By any measure along that line, Jenkins is outsized, right? I don't have numbers in front of me, but I would say that it competes favorably to the largest CNCF projects such as Kubernetes and Prometheus, and then Open Telemetry. I mean, these are monster, the biggest open source projects out there, right? And Jenkins is in that sort of class. So, I mean, certainly by any stretch of that. Let me ask you, a lot of people a couple of years ago were saying, well, with Kubernetes, speaking of cloud native, with Kubernetes, I don't know if Jenkins is still going to be relevant, if we're still going to use it. Certainly by these numbers, it can't be that everyone in the world is using Kubernetes but not using Jenkins, because there's a lot of Jenkins going on. So, there seems to have been an evolution, if you will, where Jenkins is very much being used in cloud native environments. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the 18 years of Jenkins, we've seen companies and projects come and go. So it's not a criticism, or I'm not being snarky here. I'm just saying that it's great because Jenkins really created a practice. More than a project, it defined a practice. And following that practice, a lot of innovation took place. A lot of new projects, open source projects, and a lot of companies came up with what they thought was a better way, was a different way to do things. And all of that sometimes gets lost, sometimes gets retrofitted into other products, including Jenkins. So you have this in-depth innovation taking place. If Jenkins has about 44% of install base, it means that 56% are doing Jenkins and something else. And so you have different use case, different choices based on taste and colors and so on. But I would certainly not say that if you are doing, Kubernetes deployment or serverless deployment or AI, then Jenkins is not for you. It covers such a broad number of use cases. It's what makes its strengths, right? In some ways, some other projects can be better if you do just one thing, right? If you have one mission, one use case, maybe you can find a tool that's going to be a better fit. But for lots of organizations, they actually do 20 different things. They do AI, they do Kubernetes, they do VM, they do embedded, they do a bunch of things. And to have one system to handle all of that is actually a better option. So yeah, it's very much alive and kicking.
Absolutely.
What Sasha said, because another important thing to highlight about Jenkins is its extensibility, which goes back to what Sasha said, like innovation. Like if you look at Jenkins plugin ecosystem, there are about 2,000 plugins there. And if you search for cloud native Kubernetes, you will get tens of different plugins. So again, it's obviously it is important to pick and use the right tool for the purpose, but at the same time, the flexibility and ability to, go and create something and give that back to the world so others with similar needs or use case could utilize that themselves as well as an important. So it's again, just looking at the plugin ecosystem of Jenkins shows that lots of organizations are using Jenkins for cloud native type of development as well. So I think it is important to highlight that the innovation and the community behind Jenkins is what enables this and helps many organizations regardless of their product structure or type of products they are developing.
Agreed. Guys, we're about out of time. For people who maybe want to get a little more insight into this, maybe they have some selling to do internally around Jenkins at their organization, where can they get any of this on the CD Foundation website?
We will soon have this information made available on CD Foundation website, but Jenkins project has its own website as well, jenkins.io. So that should be another place to look at.
That's the place to go to for it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And just one thing, Alan, if you don't mind. a lot of organizations sometimes feel a bit awkward in how they get to start interacting with a project. How do I get started? How do I maybe even contribute? How do I learn? The CDF is a great place for that, right? You can find a lot of knowledge. You can, a great way that lots of companies find is to become member of the CDF, to participate in the CDF. We have Fidelity, for example, who is on the board, who has a seat there. They're doing amazing work. So we're seeing a lot of passion from organization, because that's a really good way, corporate compatible way to engage, to learn, to educate your teams, to contribute what maybe you're missing from the product, and so on and so on. So there is a lot of value for organizations in participating in the CDF.
Excellent. Excellent. Fatih, Sasha, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll just say this, the state of Jenkins is strong. Go check it out, jenkins.io. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be right back.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. For those of you who watch Techstrong TV, you may know that we once a month do a nice video series where we take a deep dive. And the name of the show that we do that is called CD Pipelines. And it's
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sean Ahmed, who is Chief Product Officer for CloudBees, and we're talking about a new major update to Jenkins and a major new platform that's on its way, and we'll dive into that in a minute. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate being here.
Jenkins is still the dominant CI/CD platform out there, but it's been a while since we've seen a major update. So what's driving that update now, and what should folks be looking forward to?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, look, I think Jenkins has continued to explode, as you said, and the usage of Jenkins is through the roof. It continues to grow almost every single year. You think about jobs defined and self-reporting back to headquarters Jenkins.io and the stats that are there that anybody can see. You've seen that it's increased from 2021 to 2023. It went from like 50 million jobs reporting back to 73 million. That's a pretty.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sean Ahmed, who is Chief Product Officer for CloudBees, and we're talking about a new major update to Jenkins and a major new platform that's on its way, and we'll dive into that in a minute. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate being here.
Jenkins is still the dominant CI/CD platform out there, but it's been a while since we've seen a major update. So what's driving that update now, and what should folks be looking forward to?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, look, I think Jenkins has continued to explode, as you said, and the usage of Jenkins is through the roof. It continues to grow almost every single year. You think about jobs defined and self-reporting back to headquarters Jenkins.io and the stats that are there that anybody can see. You've seen that it's increased from 2021 to 2023. It went from like 50 million jobs reporting back to 73 million. That's a pretty explosive growth. If you think about just pipeline jobs in itself, it's gone from 27 million to 48 million. That's a 79% growth. So by all measures, if you think about sort of Jenkins self-reporting data coming back, and this is not even including any of the enterprise behind the firewall usage of Jenkins, you see that the Jenkins growth has really exploded. And when we think about things like the community, we're looking at 1 million lines of code. We're looking at 130,000 pull requests, Michael. We're looking at 20,000 issues, more than 600 plus active contributors. It's clear that Jenkins is continuing to grow in a way that is generating massive scale. This deployment sizes are things like we talked to one user the other day. They have 7,000 plus controllers. We talked to another customer the other day. They have 750,000 jobs across 6 controllers. And when you're looking at that kind of scale, there are a couple of things that stand out at that point in time that become challenging, right? Like when you have thousands of applications, you've got tens and thousands of developers using it, and you got large, complex tool chains, massive scale becomes a challenge. How do you run this in a fault-tolerant way with absolutely high resiliency, with self-healing? How do you maintain Jenkins in that sort of massive scale? And that was a problem that we were focusing on. And when we started working on this about a year ago, we said we want to create an experience that is painless for the developer, systems that just are up and running all the time. It should be performant. It should be fast. It should be an experience in where Jenkins administrator can, sort of horizontally scale jobs as required. And so we decided that we were going to get hard to work, Michael, and we created what we think is the biggest update in performance and scalability for Jenkins in a decade. And it's quite literally exactly that. And so that's something that we're releasing, here in 4 weeks, and it's got some phenomenal capabilities built into it that I'm happy to get into on this call.
Well, before we do that, one of the criticisms of DevOps has always been that it doesn't scale as well, and there's a long-standing debate between the DevOps and IDLE community over this issue. Do you think we're finally getting to the point where we can put those issues to bed and we can say, hey, DevOps does scale, and therefore I don't have to make a trade-off between agility and scale?
I think we're getting definitely to that point of view. And I think a little bit of the market and the usage needed to catch up to kind of see what kind of scale problems we would see with the various types of technologies that are out there and the tool chains that we have. And we needed to see those to be able to tackle them as they became presented to us as companies reached that level of scale. We particularly see that with Jenkins, but we similarly also see it in the cloud native world where companies are adopting cloud and having these digital transformations that are going from on-prem to hybrid and some level of cloud as well, which changes the paradigm not only of just how you build the applications, but also how you actually run the workloads and the type of technologies that you require in order to make that sort of as painless as possible for developers to be able to get the applications into the hands of its users. So I definitely think that scale was something that we needed to kind of really see people achieve first and see what kind of challenges that would be brought on. And then we are able to sort of address them with the right type of solutions and so on. I definitely think that we've caught up with that and have a lot of really great solutions for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about cloud native on this call as well, I know. So we'll get into that.
So in terms of the new capabilities, what leaps out at you most? What's the thing you think that your customers are going to look at and go, finally, we got this?
Yeah. So, the fun thing is when we talk to customers about this first capability, we always hear from them, oh my gosh, we've been waiting for this for like 10 years. This is amazing. And it's true activative high availability mode for Jenkins controllers. And that is something that we're really, really proud to bring to the market. This is the ability for you to have an environment in which you can make the experience developers have quite painless. Single sort of logical controller in front of the entire Jenkins environment, and you can have failover occur and jobs continue to run and developers don't know that anything has happened in the background. So this is also very super helpful when you're in situations where you have backups you need to do. You need to take a controller down for maintenance, or you have installations of plugins that need to come and or updates that need to occur. You can't have a developer experience where developers' jobs are not running all of a sudden. They wake up in the morning and they're trying to run. They had a pull request. They want some code committed and gone and into the production environment. And all of a sudden they realize, wait a second, there's not a controller there for me. In this situation, there's always a controller. And they never need to know which one of those controllers actually executed the job. The second capability is horizontal scaling. And that's to ensure that you get the performance and resiliency of being able to say, okay, I'm going to run a job, but as one controller is getting overloaded, you have set thresholds you can set that allows you to have jobs run on a second replicant of the same controller. And you can have as many replicants as you would want in a cluster. And this allows for jobs to sort of be scaled across and use the compute and storage resources that you have. And it allows you to be able to take jobs and ensure that they will execute as fast as they possibly can. So that's sort of feature number one, Michael, that we've added. The second feature that we've also added is a completely new workspace caching mechanism for Jenkins. And this is really great. This is giving you a little bit of control within the pipeline itself to reuse a cache in the workspace. And this is a little bit under the hood. What that means is that, when you kick off a job and you create a workspace, and the workspace typically in Jenkins will begin with, downloading the various tools that are required in order to build the application, maybe dependency scanning, and a number of other things that it downloads. But here's the thing, when it's done, you doing the job, what happens? It just nukes the entire workspace, and then you rebuild it again. With workspace caching, you can actually create, write, and read caches between workspaces and share them between jobs. In this way, you don't have to restart the whole download process every single time a job actually kicks off, and you can sort of name those workspace caches and read them back in. In our tests, we typically see the performance of jobs, because of this availability of workspace caching, to go down by 20, 30, 40% sometimes.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We are at DevOps World here in Santa Clara, Silicon Valley, 2023, talking with some other great people. There are lots of talks that are going on at the same time as we're doing these interviews and conversations. So yeah, I kind of have the best of both worlds being part of this, if you're online or here in person. So I'm joined by Adam Robertson. Adam, welcome. Adam is head of DevOps with Engage AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you. Good to have you. It's ironic because we just did a prep call for a panel. We hadn't met in person before. Now we meet, and then we're going to be on a panel.
That's right.
We're going to be talking about cloud native and some of the more nuancy things about not just it's microservices and you're good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does it really mean? What does it really entail?
Mm-hmm.
And you've also, you're in the last stages of a book you're coming out with, right? About similar for the same topic.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, finishing up the final edits now, and it's set to be published next month at the end of November.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I know I have not wrote a book, but I have a lot of friends who have, and I know from their experiences, you got to have a lot of passion about what you're writing about, because it's a lot of work to get it all the way to the finish line. So I can, admire you for getting it, that close to the finish line.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about, and understand from your book, it's not just another how-to on Kubernetes and how to set it up and, niceties of that. There's plenty of resources to do that. You're talking more the kind of ecosystem around cloud native and patterns of applications, architectural patterns, how you deploy it, what are the considerations for improving resiliency. Not to give an intro to your book, but it sounds like that's kind of what you're pursuing in this.
Yeah. I think if you take a lot of the the cloud native principles and what is required of cloud native applications, it kind of leads you to what the book primarily talks about, which is multi-cloud. In order to actually be like fully resilient, fault tolerant, and also just to satisfy your operational needs for a workload, but also your business needs, things like cost effectiveness. You can actually in a multi-cloud environment, you're able to mitigate cost differences between clouds and migrate workloads from one to the other in the event of price increases are also another big thing is availability of resources, right? GPUs are pretty hot items these days, and so
limited supply. Too.
Absolutely, and that's part of the problem is you almost if you are a GPU intensive application. You need to have, especially if you are responsive to customer needs and you need to scale, you need to have automated systems set up to do so, and you may not be able to do so in one region of a particular cloud provider. So the book primarily focuses on architectural patterns, and it certainly talks about the pros and cons and everything, and it also talks about certain necessities you need to have to complete multi-cloud Kubernetes from a service mesh perspective, and CI/CD and monitoring, security, alerting, and everything that's going to be slightly different. So I was not trying to write another book about Kubernetes because there's so many, but I was really trying to be forward-looking and saying, how do companies prepare? Like an ounce of preparation is worth 10 pounds of cure. How do they prepare for actually having 5 nines in their application for a global audience with the minimal amount of operational overhead, with putting in a lot of initial thought and preparation into launching their applications and their infrastructure on a global scale?
Well, let's pull this apart a little bit, because I think a lot of us hear about multi-cloud. Sounds like a great concept, but don't have any idea really to avoid, so you aren't locked into one vendor cloud.
Right.
But think about workload portability across clouds, resilience of applications in multi-cloud. What are the things you do to kind of set yourself up if you're starting on one CSP, but you're going to have to do a global multi-cloud deployment?
I think one of the biggest things you can do is just be very forward-thinking. When you talk about cloud native applications, IAC always comes up, infrastructure as code, and the only way that you're going to be able to automate a lot of systems and a lot of like scalability, or even first time, let's say the first time you launch something, but if you're going to do it within an individual developer portal, right, you need infrastructure as code. And things like Terraform are going to be having a different provider for each cloud, right? And if you design it correctly from the very beginning, and you know that you're going to go to multi-cloud down the line, you're not designing everything for one cloud. You're saying, okay, this is the provider I'm using for now, but when we expand down the line, we're just going to be able to modularizely, plug this in, and then all of a sudden you're on GCP, then Azure, then or Linode, whatever you're looking for.
Does it lead you to using more open source things like a Terraform instead of a proprietary or a cloud specific service, or not necessarily?
Yeah. The reason why is because cloud specific services are very cloud specific. So, if you're looking for serverless, you want to be able to design it in code to where it takes advantage of Amazon Lambda versus, another serverless, offering for another cloud. So when you start actually tailoring your solutions for a cloud offering that only exists on that cloud, you're no longer cloud agnostic. So using IAC and using Terraform, it's been around a long time, but you're able to allocate resources, based in code, and then depending on where you're actually deploying to your target environment, it actually is able to fill in the gaps for you. So that just provides, minimal operational overhead and quite a bit of automation, to where if you have an engineer who wants to go in and create an application, if there's a self-service portal, they can do so. It actually generates a Terraform, runs it against, multiple environments, and you're just set and good to go.
If I could ask a chapter in your book for you to write, maybe you did, it's talking about stateless and stateful.
Yes.
And the impact of doing either one. Are you much better off being moving to stateless, and what does that really mean from a development architectural pattern standpoint? And are there other implications if you've gone to stateless?
Absolutely. There's a couple chapters on that.
Okay, guessed right.
It's actually a very important concept, not only just to have a fundamental understanding of, but to actually implement into your architecture and design of your software. Stateless applications don't require data. They can run anywhere. They're going to be, really lightweight. They're portable, easy. So obviously, if you're going to deploy them to multiple clouds, it's quite simple, and you can have them running in parallel without having to communicate to each other because they are indeed stateless. So obviously, you want to be able to identify which of your applications are good candidates for that and really push in that direction. Some things obviously you can never go stateless, database systems. However, you can create, multiple stateless systems that coordinate with an API endpoint that is stateful, that provides that data, and then you have a centralized managed point for your data. That makes things operationally a whole lot simpler. As long as they meet your requirements for latency and throughput and everything like that, it ends up being a much more easy way to manage large-scale global systems.
I assume there's things like even just caching technology, cache aside, cache ahead,
Well,
that kind of give you a bit of an appearance of stateless.
Absolutely, and think about it this way too. Like if you primarily in the EU, people don't usually move that often, right? So if you log on to Facebook in France, it might take you 30 seconds to load your newsfeed, but that's because it's getting all the data from the US. But 99.999% of the time, that's not the case. You're localized, so having local caches for your stateless services works perfectly fine. People don't notice. It's rapid fire. In the case you need to go back and retrieve a certain amount of data, you're going to get some latency. However, that's such a small percentage of your use cases that it, on the whole, doesn't really affect your users.
Properly applied, you too can do this at home, right?
YouTube does it, yes.
How about so kind of shifting topics here? Resilience is everybody's talking about it, from organizational resilience to in the cloud. Well, first of all, how do you define resilience in the context of cloud native, multi-cloud?
Yeah, I would actually take it a bit further and not define it in terms of cloud native, but in terms of it from the user's perspective. It's always there. It's always on, and no matter what happens, act of God or you run out of GPUs, like the end user doesn't notice, right? You're fault tolerant. You're able to move resources around as needed in response to downtimes. Like if level 3 has a network outage in the East Coast, you're able to very easily switch things over to the West Coast. And actually even better if you have an automated system that does it for you, to where you don't even know. You just get a report in your Datadog saying, hey, we transferred this over here. And you're like, cool, it worked.
So expect the unexpected, right?
I always say, and I say this too much, my teams tend to say, stop saying it, but hope for the best, plan for the worst. And when I plan for the worst, I plan for what I call the 747 test, which is 747 lands on your data center. So it just wiped, and you don't know why, but you don't really care. You need to get the system up. So if you actually have these fault-tolerant, resistant systems that are self-healing and also, able to quickly allocate resources, allocate requests over to another resource, like another data center, you actually don't skip a beat. You may have a few seconds of outage while you update DNS, but at the end of the day, you prepared for it, and your users end up, not noticing, which means money keeps flowing and your business keeps operating.
I always use the analogy. We see all these robot videos of people, banging them with a 2x4, pushing them over when they're trying to jump up on or whatever, and they recover. I mean, they still manage. It may falter, may whatever. It's do they recover, stand back up, and kind of can proceed from there. To me, that's what resilience is.
Yeah, and if you think about the best way we can bang our robots is like high traffic road, right? Let's say, for instance, Black Friday is coming up, right? If everyone is not preparing for NX traffic, like I never say it's 1,000x or 100x. You don't say that. You say it's N, right? Because you don't know.
Right.
You just need to make sure you have the scalability.
Whatever you plan for, it'll be bigger.
Yeah, and again, plan for the worst. But that the kicking of the robot essentially is perhaps you've reached a certain limit, so you either need to scale or you need to divide, and actually expand out to multi-region or multi-cloud as well. And hopefully you've already had the system set up and the processes set up as well to automatically do it in response to your traffic. So you don't actually have to get kicked. You see the guy coming and raising his leg, and you're like, I'm ready. And even if he kicks you, you're like, okay, we're good, because there's 3 of me now.
I'm thinking about one of the things about moving to the cloud. Over time, you learn some assumptions that you made when you're in your own data center that you maybe have to kind of think about it a little bit differently. Maybe it's radically different. What are some assumptions in architectural design, if you're deploying even multi-cloud, you've kind of got that figured out. What are maybe some assumptions you should rethink or think about more deeply in terms of resilience?
I think there's probably two that I would just cite. One is people assume they've done all the due diligence and requirement gathering, and they usually haven't. So, I always tell my teams also, like, if I have 6 weeks to build a boat, I'm going to plan for 5. Right? Because a good amount of planning, research, requirements gathering, making sure you understand your scope and everything like that allows for the build should just be tick, 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 right? So spending the more time than you generally think you need to do requirements gathering, from stakeholders, from business stakeholders, from your engineering teams, from your own team about the operational requirements, things that people don't often think about. You're like, okay, what's going to happen if this goes down? And it's a third party we have no control of, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, we need a backup plan for this, and like, what's your backup plan to your backup plan in case that fails, right? So a lot of people don't spend the necessary time. They get excited, they dive in, and then they build something and it works until it doesn't.
One of the things I would put in that category too is resilience to change. Because change is we bought a company. Now all of a sudden we are 10x traffic, right. But we have to kind of rethink, re-architect, add whatever, a new system to interface to that isn't resilient, whatever it might be. How you think it is today, it's not a static thing. The design of this
100%. So, and that's the second thing I was going to say is assume that you're going to run into corner and edge cases that you had no idea, and how are you going to respond to that? So, a good example is really critical, security alerts that you get. Like if you're hit with one, and you're actually under compliance framework, you have to actually allocate, you have to resolve it within 48 hours.
Right.
Can you do that? Like people don't think about that when you're building a system, but you're like, hey, if this system's regulated, or even if it's not, it's a good idea. But how are we going to be able to patch this? Or just like you said, like we're buying a company, and good example. I was part of a gaming company that got bought by a large Disney, and they basically told us we had to move to Disney's data centers. We had not prepared for that. And so when we actually looked at how long that was going to take, 8 months, and they were like, no, we need it in 6 weeks. And it's like, we never once thought about the idea that we're going to have to move complete data centers and, just, and especially do so within 6 weeks. So basically had to drop everything and just stop all projects to just be able to allocate that, because we just never thought of that as a possibility.
So it's always what are all the assumptions you make, and then assume that they're all going to be whacked. They're
and
all
also
go away, right?
be open to the fact that they're wrong. Because a lot of times people think this is a solved problem. It's not always a solved problem. It may have been 2 years ago when you designed the system, but it doesn't mean it is today. So there's that initial shock, then that robot gets kicked, it stumbles. Like, if you can minimize that stumble, you get back on track a whole lot faster. And so,
great. Well, we're going to be on a panel here in a little bit, so we'll get to explore this some more. Are you independently publishing your book, or is it going to be available when it does come out?
It's with BPV Publishing out of India, so it's I have it on my LinkedIn. It's available on their store and on Amazon, and then of course I'll be selling it on my own.
Okay. All right. Look for Adam Robertson. Thank you very much for joining us, and really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah.
I mean, we covered a pretty big swath there, and of course Adam took it pretty deep for that short of a conversation, which is great. So thanks for being part of our conversation here. Absolutely. We have more interviews. Matter of fact, have some interviews coming up with other people that are going to be on the panel today as well with me. So we're going to be talking about cloud native and kind of state of it and some of the implications of what it means to be cloud native. So hang tight. You'll get to watch that too. Actually going to live stream that as part of our broadcast. So stay tuned. Interview coming up next. We'll see you in a few minutes. Everybody, welcome back to DevOps World here in Silicon Valley, Santa Clara, 2023. As I said, we have some fantastic people that we're talking to, interviewing. Also, the next guest is part of a panel we're doing in about an hour or so, not too far down the road here. So, Tara Hernandez, welcome.
Hello.
Good to be chatting with you. VP Product Development with Mongo, right?
Developer productivity.
Developer productivity.
Developer
Thank you
productivity.
very much.
Yes.
And of course, you have extensive background with Google and Pixar and lots of great stuff.
I think you're saying I'm old, Mitch.
No, I didn't say that. I said, no, that all happened in a span of 3 years. It's
Oh, yeah.
amazing you did all that. So I know one of the things you're passionate about is, culture and fostering an environment for innovation, but also around kind of the topic of infrastructure. I don't know if I would have said that was top of my list, which is okay. It's the top of yours. Why is that a passion of yours?
Well, so it's interesting. Like when I got out of college, I had a bachelor's degree in computer science. The first job I got was at a company called Borland International.
I remember Borland.
Way back in the day, they
Borland.
did compilers, the best compiler in the industry at the time, and databases. And yet my job was as a build engineer. Like I typed make, and I flipped the floppies around to make the golden masters, and sometimes I would help debug build systems, but it wasn't a particularly profound job, right? And then I got an opportunity to switch to a startup, Netscape Communications. A bunch of Borland people had gone over there, in addition to the SGI folks that had come over and joined Mark and all the college students who had been working on the various forms of Mosaic and Lynx and the early browsers, right? And in what I found there and what I got to participate with was the sort of the beginnings of modern infrastructure that is, web-based, right? Continuous integration, which had not, as a term, had not been coined yet, but became very critical. And you have a single source that needs to be compiling on, dozens of different platforms, and we needed tools. And so my role, which had started out as a type make, right, and maybe debug the compile errors, turned into development. And we developed a Tinderbox tool, which, it's like, a Tinderbox. It was that old thing. Eventually, it was replaced primarily by Hudson and Jenkins when Kosuke did his thing. We also, had to invent a web-based bug tracking system, Bugzilla, which is still being used by some people 25
Working
years
on
later.
So many amazing things.
Yeah, and so it was that idea of like, okay, yeah, there were commercial products at the time, but they were very tied to the operating system. So that innovation of like actually infrastructure is something that Netscape as a company realized we needed to invest more in order to up-level the ability to deliver the software as quickly as possible. And over the years, infrastructure is now its own thing. You have CloudBeast is, I think, a very prominent example. GitHub, Circle CI. There's a lot of GitLabs. A lot of companies that this is what they do is they do infrastructure, and so the need to do that implementation in many cases is no longer necessary, right? And you shouldn't. But for a lot of companies, there is that special thing that particular engineering organization for the particular types of products that they're developing, where up-leveling that infrastructure, the software development pipeline, is going to bring benefit. So putting in that level of investment to not just say, oh, well, I'm just going to install Jenkins and call it a day, no offense to Jenkins, right? That's like step one, right? And so one of the things that got me really excited about my current role, I never thought I'd be a vice president in an engineering organization, but at the company that I'm now at, MongoDB, that understanding of infrastructure as a business differentiator for our ability to deliver our software, it has been established for over a decade. And so the amount of investment that MongoDB puts into, let us have that infrastructure investment across a breadth of topics, and what can we do to push the needle? And so it was an opportunity I could not turn down, and I'm so glad I took it. But I think other companies, can benefit from having that type of attitude, I think, around software development.
Well, there's some interesting threads that connect for me in your description, because one, your successive of kind of series of technologies that you've worked on in your career. One thing leads to another, and oftentimes those are to use the colloquial term, mother of invention, right?
Absolutely.
And necessity is, and so that turns into a product, or that turns into an open source kind of thing. And what you're talking about when you're talking about infrastructure, it's not virtual servers and cloud storage and, kind of hard infrastructure.
Well, that's part of it, but
that's part of it. You're talking about all of the kind of glue code and process and what's underpinning a development cycle to be able to get code out the door, or to run it in a SaaS environment, or run it multi-cloud, or whatever it is. There's a lot more kind of things that underpin all of that to happen. Some of it may get productized someday in addition to what you do now. But that's what you mean by, am I getting the vibe right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a great example of that. There was not an ounce of entrepreneurship in any of my team. When Netscape started to disperse and the diaspora started, none of us considered taking those tools and doing anything with it. But an early employee of Mozilla.org who was hired to maintain the Mozilla Tinderbox, he's like, this is actually a really good idea, Paul Bigger. And then he went off and I think he founded Circle CI, right? So, I mean, that idea of like, everything has an ability to become critical in a broad sense, right? I think that's, and I don't think we're in a position now as an industry where we poo-poo that idea of infrastructure engineering as somehow being lesser, or at least smart companies do not.
Platform engineering is kind of one aspect of
absolutely.
It, right?
It absolutely is.
Right?
Yeah, and so I think it's, that idea of innovation. The engineers that I hire, they're not somehow subpar. They're top of their game, and they're doing cool stuff. They're just not necessarily doing it for immediate business benefit. It's transitive business benefit.
But a lot of it is to kind of increase flow, reduce friction, make things easier, maybe faster. I had my own experience like that, where a developer had written some scripts. This is quite a while back. It was IP change. When we saw certain kind of attacks, he would insert firewall rules to block them, and that turned into a product, and turned into a whole industry sector of intrusion prevention, things like that. But that was a Perl script. It started.
Perl was the language of infrastructure for a very long time.
Yeah, it is the utility knife.
Yeah, it is
utility
absolutely.
belt. Now I think it's Python or Bash and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got their favorite thing. Go, I think, is also right. And I think the important thing is that it is not useful to say, oh, well, we'll just take a portion of our product developers and have them focus on that stuff, right? It's a specialist, it's a niche area. Good product developers can do it, but if you're asking them to do that on top of like trying to get features out, you're doing them and your company a disservice, right? And so that's where that idea of investment, comes into. When I got to Pixar, I was the first dedicated infrastructure person they hired. This was back in 2002. And previously, there was, it was basically whoever was the last hired was like, okay, here's the Perl script that runs the nightly build, right?
Yep.
And they had other things to be doing, and so they would put minimum effort because that wasn't their primary job. And at the time, it was a 4,000-line Perl script. I think there was one subroutine in it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I still every time I run into the guy who was like help author that, he's like, shut up, don't talk to me.
What were you thinking?
No, they're thinking like, this isn't my job, but I need to get something out, right? So bringing in a tool that the bug tracking system was a single Sybase table, right? They didn't have anybody focused on that. So we were able to, one of the benefits of bringing me in that they hoped to get to was being able to parallelize software development in a way they hadn't been able to do before. So, one piece of proprietary software to make the movie. So they make one movie at a time, and that's all they can do. It's like, how do we have branches? How do we parallelize that so we can do multiple productions simultaneously, but still support it technically? That was the thing that I was able to help them figure out.
What a multiplying factor that is.
Right, and it needed someone full time. And by the time I left Pixar, there was 13 people doing infrastructure, starting from one, dedicated. But it was a mix of engineering, documentation, testing. I guess there was 3. There was 1 build engineer and 2 QA engineers. So what is that, a factor of 3 something?
Well, and they could not do it without it, right? I mean, that's because they expanded because of that capability. So back to the origins of fostering a culture. to do that. What are your thoughts on that? How do you let people know this is extremely important, and it's, we're not hiring you to kind of clean up everybody else's mess. You're creating part of our product, part of what we do.
Yeah, and, the art of writing job descriptions is really important there. And if you look at the MongoDB careers page, you'll see. I think there's one open developer productivity role right now. You'll see we talk about exactly what we're trying to do and why it matters. And then I have a philosophy that I share with my team. I'm sure you're familiar with. I think this came out of Intuit or Intel, or maybe IBM, the 3 horizons of business, right? So I have a variation of that, which is the 3 horizons of infrastructure. It's like the things you do that are keeping the lights on, which is helping your developers, answering immediate questions, fixing immediate bugs, making sure your services are up, right? Then there's the projects that you're doing that you think, oh, this is going to solve this particular problem. But then how do you get to those projects? Well, then there's that moonshot long-term investment where you make space. I make space for my developers. Go experiment. Go to conferences, be following the open source projects, see what's going on in industry, get inspired, and then put together a proposal, and then tell us what problem it's going to solve, and then let's implement that project.
It is that
create a system.
It's that moonshot. Like, you could pick DevOps as an example. Its origins being, what if we could do multiple deploys a day, right? That's insane. How could we ever do that?
How could we ever
What
do
if
that?
we could do, 5 movies at once instead of 1? Oh, that's crazy. We could never do that. Well, yeah, we can. I mean, that's that inspiration, that creative tension, right, that kind of draws people to solve that. You don't have to solve the whole problem, and you might actually deviate from that moonshot and just go straight to Mars.
Yeah, well, there is that. Yeah, I mean, you think about like what Hudson and Jenkins back in the early 2000s. What it was doing was basically a little wrapper around a resource manager, right? And then that expanded out with the plugin ecosystem, which you could argue good or bad. They're good and bad.
Yes, then that argument's been had
and many times, and will continue indefinitely. But then into the cloud hosting and the platform, and the software delivery platform, and then now the new SaaS-based features of aggregating data and all of those other things, and it's evolved over 20 years, right? And it's a beautiful thing. And now we're bringing AI into it, which I will admit I'm a little like, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But you can't discount the opportunity, right? And here's another great example of where you can have innovation infrastructure. So AI, right? Well-established companies with a strong desire to preserve their corporate IP and a lot of money in the bank might feel a little bit like, well, AI is kind of an untested space legally. We don't want to get sued, right? With our products, right? Because that's attached to revenue. What if we have the infrastructure people start to experiment in ways that do not create that same risk, right? Who are a bunch of smart people doing cool things. And that's one of the things that we're working on now, right? It's how to bring in this new technology, play with it, explore it, and not have to worry about potential impacts on the business until we have a better understanding of what those might be. So,
very cool. Sounds like you have multiple books in your head just to find a way to write it.
I'm going to have to retire before I have time to write books. I've thought about it. I need to get back to writing my blogs. It's been a while.
You should.
But yeah, it's fun. I think, I've never been the best tech person ever, right? And I think that maybe that's one of the reasons I got into management too so quickly. But the ability of technology in conjunction with smart, motivated people to solve interesting problems has always been fascinating to me.
Well, that's what's great about our industry is you have the tools in your hands to create the next set of tools, right?
Yeah.
So we're already equipped in many ways and we're just naturally inclined, and we think that way. Like, how do I make this easier? This is crazy. Why am I doing this? Or why are we? And
yeah.
Poof, we've got a 2,000 line Perl script instead of 1,000. Or Python or whatever.
A 30-line Python script.
Yeah, exactly.
A little lambda here. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think the thing I love the most about infrastructure also relates to that, which is the immediate gratification. Have I solved your problem? You can tell me. We work together. We're coworkers, right? Yeah. I don't have to worry about a market fit or go-to-market strategy or any of those things. It's just like, hey, my developers are struggling in these areas. We've instrumented some telemetry to help us understand what's going on there. All right, let's figure out how to fix that. Boom. Did we do it? Awesome.
Excellent. Well, note a personal thanks. Other than creating movies for Pixar, almost everything you mentioned I've used. So thank you for all that you've done to move us forward.
My
Technology
tiny
you've
little
created.
piece of participation in all
I
of
just
those.
could kind of check them off like, yep, I've done that. I'm creating a movie. Nah, it's not on my bucket list, but
I can't draw stick figures, but I can help build Maya plugins.
I can watch them, enjoy them.
Yes.
Well, Tara Hernandez, who's with Mongo today, and you heard about the long list of companies' contributions she's made to the industry. So somebody to follow. Let's get some more stuff out on LinkedIn or whatever you want to do.
I'll work on that, I promise.
There's a world that needs to hear from you more, okay? If that motivates you. I'd love to see that.
I don't know. A little daunting, but thank you.
You're busy enough. I get that. That's tough to fit in. Great. Well, I look forward to our panel. Hang on. That's up, I think, about an hour from now or so. So we're going to have some more conversation, particularly around cloud native and where we are and what that means. So getting some diverse opinions about it, too. It won't be your standard, it's all about microservices and containers conversation. I don't think we'll go there. So we'll talk about that and a lot more. Thank you very much, Tara. Stay right there. Same bat channel, same bat station. We'll be back in just a few with our next interview.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sean Ahmed, who is Chief Product Officer for CloudBees, and we're talking about a new major update to Jenkins and a major new platform that's on its way, and we'll dive into that in a minute. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate being here.
Jenkins is still the dominant CI/CD platform out there, but it's been a while since we've seen a major update. So what's driving that update now, and what should folks be looking forward to?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, look, I think Jenkins has continued to explode, as you said, and the usage of Jenkins is through the roof. It continues to grow almost every single year. You think about jobs defined and self-reporting back to headquarters Jenkins IO and the stats that are there that anybody can see. You've seen that it's increased from 2021 to 2023. It went from like 50 million jobs reporting back to 73 million. That's a pretty explosive growth. If you think about just pipeline jobs in itself, it's gone from 27 million to 48 million. That's a 79% growth. So by all measures, if you think about sort of Jenkins self-reporting data coming back, and this is not even including any of the enterprise behind the firewall usage of Jenkins, you see that the Jenkins growth has really exploded. And when we think about things like the community, we're looking at 1 million lines of code. We're looking at 130,000 pull requests, Michael. We're looking at 20,000 issues, more than 600 plus active contributors. It's clear that Jenkins is continuing to grow in a way that is generating massive scale. This deployment sizes are things like we talked to one user the other day. They have 7,000 plus controllers. We talked to another customer the other day. They have 750,000 jobs across 6 controllers. And when you're looking at that kind of scale, there are a couple of things that stand out at that point in down that become challenging, right? Like when you have thousands of applications, you've got tens and thousands of developers using it, and you got large, complex tool chains, massive scale becomes a challenge. How do you run this in a fault-tolerant way with absolutely high resiliency, with self-healing? How do you maintain Jenkins in that sort of massive scale? And that was a problem that we were focusing on. And when we started working on this about a year ago, we said we want to create an experience that is painless for the developer, systems that just are up and running all the time. It should be performant. It should be fast. It should be an experience in where Jenkins administrator can, sort of horizontally scale jobs as required. And so we decided that we were going to get hard to work, Michael, and we created what we think is the biggest update in performance and scalability for Jenkins in a decade. And it's quite literally exactly that. And so that's something that we're releasing, here in 4 weeks, and it's got some phenomenal capabilities built into it that I'm happy to get into on this call.
Well, before we do that, one of the criticisms of DevOps has always been that it doesn't scale as well. And there's a long-standing debate between the DevOps and IDLE community over this issue. Do you think we're finally getting to the point where we can put those issues to bed and we can say, hey, DevOps does scale, and therefore I don't have to make a trade-off between agility and scale?
I think we're getting definitely to that point of view. And I think a little bit of the market and the usage needed to catch up to kind of see what kind of scale problems we would see with the various types of technologies that are out there and the tool chains that we have. And we needed to see those to be able to tackle them as they became presented to us as companies reached that level of scale. We particularly see that with Jenkins, but we similarly also see it in the cloud native world where companies are adopting cloud and having these digital transformations that are going from on-prem to hybrid and some level of cloud as well, which changes the paradigm not only of just how you build the applications, but also how you actually run the workloads and the type of technologies that you require in order to make that sort of as painless as possible for developers to be able to get the applications into the hands of its users. So I definitely think that scale was something that we needed to kind of really see people achieve first and see what kind of challenges that would be brought on. And then we are able to sort of address them with the right type of solutions and so on. I definitely think that we've caught up with that and have a lot of really great solutions for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about cloud native on this call as well, I know. So we'll get into that.
So in terms of the new capabilities, what leaps out at you most? What's the thing you think that your customers are going to look at and go, finally, we got this?
Yeah. So, the fun thing is when we talk to customers about this first capability, we always hear from them, oh my gosh, we've been waiting for this for like 10 years. This is amazing. And it's true activative high availability mode for Jenkins controllers. And that is something that we're really, really proud to bring to the market. This is the ability for you to have an environment in which you can make the experience developers have quite painless. Single sort of logical controller in front of the entire Jenkins environment, and you can have failover occur and jobs continue to run and developers don't know that anything has happened in the background. So this is also very super helpful when you're in situations where you have backups you need to do. You need to take a controller down for maintenance, or you have installations of plugins that need to come and or updates that need to occur. You can't have a developer experience where developers' jobs are not running. All of a sudden, they wake up in the morning and they're trying to run. They had a pull request. They want some code committed and gone and into the production environment. And all of a sudden, they realize, wait a second, there's not a controller there for me. In this situation, there's always a controller. And they never need to know which one of those controllers actually executed the job. The second capability is horizontal scaling. And that's to ensure that you get the performance and resiliency of being able to say, okay, I'm going to run a job, but as one controller is getting overloaded, you have certain thresholds you can set that allows you to have jobs run on a second replicant of the same controller. And you can have as many replicants as you would want in a cluster. And this allows for jobs to sort of be scaled across and use the compute and storage resources that you have. And it allows you to be able to take jobs and ensure that they will execute as fast as they possibly can. So that's sort of feature number one, Michael, that we've added. The second feature that we've also added is a completely new workspace caching mechanism for Jenkins. And this is really great. This is giving you a little bit of control within the pipeline itself to reuse a cache in the workspace. And this is a little bit under the hood. What that means is that, when you kick off a job and you create a workspace, and the workspace typically in Jenkins will begin with, downloading the various tools that are required in order to build the application, maybe dependency scanning, and a number of other things that it downloads. But here's the thing. When it's done, you doing the job, what happens? It just nukes the entire workspace, and then you rebuild it again. With workspace caching, you can actually create, write, and read caches between workspaces and share them between jobs. In this way, you don't have to restart the whole download process every single time a job actually kicks off, and you can sort of name those workspace caches and read them back in. In our tests, we typically see the performance of jobs because of this availability of workspace caching to go down by 20, 30, 40%, sometimes even 50% at the absolute highest end of things. But that's a lot less compute and storage resource you need as you think about sort of executing a job and be able to cut that down. But most importantly, it's the actual time it takes for developers to be able to run their jobs. Theoretically, opening up more space to do more commits, to run more and get more code out into production on Jenkins. And that's important to developers, right? So you combine sort of high availability, which is active and always there, with horizontal scaling and workspace caching. Not only did you get a much more resilient environment, but you get a far more performant environment as well. So that's, I think, going to have a tremendous impact on those that manage Jenkins and those that are consumers of Jenkins pipelines running, and how fast they'll be able to do that. So that's kind of the exciting two big features that we have that are in the product. But not only that, we also have a complete new feature in Cloud-based CI for Jenkins called Pipeline Explorer. And this is a brand new way of actually debugging and troubleshooting pipeline jobs in a beautiful visual interface that allows you to take a job run, be able to read it up. You automatically get errors and challenges and things like that automatically tagged within the system. And later in the year, and then maybe into next year, we'll also be connecting that capability to some self-healing and AI, such that you'll be able to take a challenge that you're seeing inside of the job and be able to use ML and AI to bring back, healing. In other words, suggestions and how to fix the problem that your pipeline might have had as well. So that's an exciting new feature as well. And this is all packaged in the September release of the product, available to all Cloud-based CI customers.
Jenkins has been around for a long time, and we see AI is coming down the pike. Are we on the cusp of some sort of modernization effort around Jenkins? Because a lot of these installations have been in place for a long time, and they have a lot of extensions and customizations. And some of that stuff is now better handled in other ways. So is it time for everybody to kind of sit down and re-engineer those workflows?
I think it's definitely an opportunity for sure. I think about a lot of ML and AI and how it's actually used in the pipeline and used generally within Jenkins and how it executes. I think there's a lot of use cases that we can potentially address with them. When we think about those,
Hey everybody, welcome back to DevOps World 2023 here in Silicon Valley, Santa Clara. We have another great interview, another speaker from, I think, one of our sessions this afternoon. And I have the great pleasure already, a great interesting conversation that we've had before we got started with Joyce Lynn. Welcome,
Hi.
Senior Director of Developer Relations with Postman.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. It's awesome to have you. I've already learned so much. So I know you have like millions of users, but there's new people all the time, like may not know what Postman is. Give us a quick definition of what it is.
I'm actually excited to be here because I usually go to developer conferences, and speaking with DevOps platform people is not my wheelhouse. So Postman is an API platform, even though it has the word platform in it. It's a lot of people think of it as a dev tool or an API client, but it's an API platform used by over 25 million developers, testers, anybody who uses APIs. So especially in the US, like we have pretty good awareness. Yeah.
Very cool. So if you're like designing APIs, using APIs.
Exactly. Like, so a lot of people use it like an API client, but the entire API lifecycle, if you're deploying and observing, publishing, creating documentation, all of that.
You don't have to figure that out yourself.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You got it up.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so we're talking about, platform engineering is a very hot topic. It's interesting because it's legitimized so fast as a role, which tells you there's been a real need. And I think a lot of it is timing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about sort of API adoption, what's happening with the people that you work with. How's the conversation changed since you started with Postman a few years back to what's happening now?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been with Postman almost 7 years, and I mean, I like to say that tech changes pretty fast. So in the early days, again, I was talking with a really niche use case, right? API client, and now I've been talking to people along the entire API lifecycle, and people are actually starting to think of APIs as having a lifecycle. So in the early days, it was something that you tacked on top of a larger system, and now I give a lot of talks about API first, the idea that you needed to design and develop an API first before any other functionality, right? And so you're thinking about the design, the potential impacts, and that ends up getting you. It's a very similar to concept to agile versus waterfall. Yeah.
It's a good analogy because APIs used to be sort of the few use cases that where there was ingress or egress in and out of some larger SOA monolithic application. Now it's how the application works with itself, right? API first, as well as internal, externally. Sometimes it's not even clear whether it's internal or external.
And if you think about, there's a quote I'm going to get wrong, but is it like form follows function or function follows form? It's one of those. But if you think about the actual form, that is going to drive the function, right? I think that's what it is. But like, if you have this much to expose to somebody, really focus on this because this is going to drive a lot of what happens later on.
Well, and since you're in the life cycle part of this phase, if you haven't been doing it for a while, like how do you grandfather, kind of use that old term, right? Do you grandfather API, sunset them? Are you maintaining ability across versions? How do you do versions of APIs?
Yeah.
Was there a time where you stopped supporting some variation of it?
Yeah.
Or how do you make them more resilient so you don't have to sunset APIs?
I do talk about API first a lot of times, and it's the easiest to do when you're starting with a blank slate.
Yeah.
But seldomly do people walk into that situation. They always have like a ton of APIs, and the dirty little secret is most large organizations, don't have good visibility about that API scope creep. There's stuff running that people don't know about.
Yeah.
And so there's little hacks to get at getting that visibility, like sniffing the traffic, proxying the traffic, so that you can identify like, okay, what all is running on my infrastructure. But it's the reason why a lot of us have jobs here today is because organizations struggle with it, right?
Well, it is very evolutionary, right? If you aren't doing API first, or think about APIs and what you're going to publish, what's going to be visible. It's a necessity, mother invention kind of thing where, okay, let's add these APIs to do this now. Oh, we need to provide this information to customers. All right, here's another set of APIs. Soon you have hundreds, if not thousands, of different APIs nobody either knows about, planned about, or how do you manage those?
Yeah.
Right?
And so part of my talk is about, platform engineering and how you can impact developer happiness. And a lot of developer happiness is spending time working on things that you feel like don't matter, or you're just that don't matter, or they're just going into the ether, right? So if I already created something, why should my colleague have to create the exact same thing? And if something as simple as creating like visibility for all of your microservices, all of your websites, all of your whatever is a huge part of what, like, I think I'm going to be talking about, Spotify Engineering talks about it. Have you heard of Backstage? Yeah, Backstage internal developer portal, where so basic, having visibility of stuff going on in your org is the biggest challenge.
So when you're talking about platform engineering, and there's a lot of elements to it, right? Which is actually one of, I think, the great things about it. It's kind of Swiss Army knife. If you need this, that's part of it. And one of them is IDPs or developer platforms, whatever you might call those. Is that your focus of how do you deliver kind of API management, support, lifecycle, et cetera, through a developer kind of portal?
In a sense, yes. And I think IDP is something that people jump to, and that's what they're looking for. There's a new term called API platform, which I think is relatively new. Gartner recently has been talking about that as API platform operator, a new kind of role where you're expected to pull all the platforms together. Yeah.
What do you think of that idea? Sometimes analysts make up categories to sell more analyst reports.
I wonder where they got
say that.
the
I'm in the analyst
concept.
business.
Yeah.
It happens. But I mean, what do you think about kind of identifying it that way? Does that make sense to you?
It does, based on the conversations I'm having with other organizations, but I think people throw the word platform around a lot. And just to your earlier question, like, what is platform engineering, right? Are you a platform engineer if you do infrastructure? Are you a platform engineer if you work on something that cuts across all teams? Everyone can have their own definition.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the timing was great for platform engineering too, because of economic conditions. You all of a sudden heard about developer productivity. Okay, well, how do I make that better? If, engineering managers are like, I'm not sure what to do, and the focus on the developer with platform engineering, I think, was perfect timing to have it adopted.
And I do think it's like a little bit pendulum swinging one way and pendulum swinging the other. When I first got started in tech a long time ago, we talked about like agile, right? And you've probably talked to people about shifting left. And it's like, just shift this left. And eventually, without standardization, without like having starting points for people, you're shifting everything onto the developer, and that's the anti-pattern that comes about with embedded ops. Yeah,
I think that's the fallacy of shift left, and it's really about moving things earlier in the life cycle, not giving everything to the developer. I mean, they don't want to do compliance work. They want to create compliant software. But yeah.
And that's what I think about sometimes when I'm telling people about API first. Oh, just design the API first, developer or architect. And a lot of developers think it's a good idea intellectually, but then they struggle when it comes to actually executing.
How do you do it?
They talk about like cognitive load and like I can add this part, I can add these endpoints later. I don't want to think about it holistically right from the beginning. And if you are starting from scratch, then yes, it can be very overwhelming.
But it's also taking concept to reality, like microservices. Okay, what's an atomic unit of work? How much do you do in a microservice? There's no one way to do that, and you kind of have to learn like this works. This is, in different situations might do different things, but it doesn't come with the manual of how to do API first, right?
It is, and it takes constant evaluation. Like at Postman Engineering, we've had microservices. We're like a baby shop. We're like, our total headcount's 700, so baby compared to some of these other organizations here today. But we've definitely had microservices and then realized, okay, now this is just becoming like a distributed monolith. Yeah, and then swinging it back the other way.
Swing it the other way. So, crystal ball question, which means you can't be wrong because nobody can be right.
Okay, excellent.
And know they're right. Where do you think we're going with APIs? What's next beyond API first and API lifecycle management?
API lifecycle, so you're asking what's next. Some people are just now thinking about that. So not to say like, oh, there's something else coming.
Not looking for insider product information, not that.
No, I get it. But like there's some people that are just starting to think about these issues. And so the idea of what's the next beyond that can be a little much. But I did see there was a talk today about AI and AI's role in DevOps. And so I work with developers, dev tools, and productivity. I personally consume a lot of software that has been sneaking little pieces in there, and I have to say, it's not an original thought, but like generative AI, like if your team is not currently looking at how to roll that into your developer experience, your business offering, like I feel like everyone has a SWAT team on this right now.
Well, and it's so easy. I mean, you got Copilot and Code Assist, and a lot of paths to that with Microsoft and GitHub and others.
Yeah.
There are others besides
that are all enabled by API.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how they plug into the IDE, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's all this ecosystem, working for you. Sometimes that can get a little crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We always like, okay, when do the plugins overtake the main app? Sometimes that happens. There's a whole debate about Jenkins and that and all the plugins.
Really? Okay.
It's kind of an interesting topic. Well, it's been fascinating talking with you.
Yeah.
I love
Pleasure to be
talking
here.
about
Thank
this
you.
stuff.
Yeah.
So good luck with your talk.
Okay.
Is it a talk or a panel you're doing this at?
It's a talk. Yeah. It's a full on talk. It's just me up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have an open invitation to any DevOps conference you want to come
Amazing.
to and talk.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
we'd love to have you back on Techstrong TV.
Thank you.
All right. Joyce Lynn, who Senior Director of Developer Relations with Postman. So if you don't know about Postman, if you're one of the other, 36 billion people on the planet that don't know about it, go check it out. That aren't developing it. Maybe AI will show you how to use Postman. We'll see what happens next. Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
Hang in there. We're going to be doing our panel next. So we'll be just a little bit of a gap here, and then we're going to be talking about cloud native, kind of state of it, where we're going with that. What does it mean to be cloud native? How do we get the most out of that kind of an architectural pattern? All right, thanks everybody. Welcome again to being with us with DevOps World, and we're glad that you're on this journey here with us.